Good morning and welcome everyone. Just give everything a minute to load up and for people to come along before we get started this morning. Morning, Tom. Hope everyone is well. I'm not sure if Lachlan Clash can make it along this morning. He did send his apologies that he might be busy, in which case we'll get started, but I'll just give it a quick minute. Tom, I might also just ask that you admit people who jump into the waiting lobby, please, and keep an eye on the chat, as it's easy to get distracted while you're presenting, of course. So please jump in at any time. I can see everyone's got their cameras and mics off. I'm hoping that you still have control to turn them on if you need to. But all good. I will share my screen and we'll get rocking and rolling this morning. All right, can we see my share screen all good? Thank you. So just wanted to start off with a quick note that this is a repeat of a presentation that was done on the 21st of the 8th last year. So you can see that up here, we've got the session recording here. And I've also just put some times and some kind of key questions or notes and comments that kind of came up. So if you'd like to review any of those, but I'm hoping we'll address all of those in today's presentation as well. For those of you who haven't met me, my name is Murray Rose. I'm an educational technologist with DLT, and we've got Tom, who's also an educational technologist, along to help monitor the chat and any questions you might have. Probably going to do a lot of talking today, but please feel free to put questions into the chat, or if it's something that's really kind of lines up with what we're talking about, pop yourself off mute and let me know, or pop your hand up. I'm going to start off with really basic stuff and then move through to some of the newer and more advanced features. So I've got this Padlet to kind of help keep me on track, which I'm just going to pop a link to that Padlet into the chat now. So please feel free to follow along. The Padlet is definitely just designed as view only, so just so that you've got that information at hand. So we're going to start off with, like I said, the basics kind of setups. There's a few new quiz settings that came out at the end of last year, so we'll go through those. They have now been updated into these Brightspace help guides. So if you have any questions or want to come back to that, those are there and easy for you to review. The big question we commonly get asked is how to amend questions when there's a problem. Particularly for quizzes that are open. So there seems to be two kind of situations. Quizzes that are, say, open for a couple of days or a week, and there's a question that's a problem that needs addressing, and then we have to consider equity for students who got the question with the error versus students who got the new question that didn't have the error. Or the process to do when you've got, say, a final exam that has a set time. All students have completed that final exam and you potentially have flagged a question now that has a problem. So similar processes for just slightly different situations. And we'll talk about why we still recommend the same process of updating the problem question, because it kind of separates it out really, really nicely. Throughout today's presentation, I'm going to jump over into my sandbox. A lot of the presentation will be live in my sandbox. I will apologize. It's full of random stuff, of course. It's a sandbox full of playthings. So please just don't overthink that, and let me know if there's anything in there or anything that comes up as we go. So jumping over to my sandbox now. Two main ways to access the quiz and exams tools. So the subject admin button, which will take you to full control of all the different tools that you have available within Brightspace, or through the assessment tab, quizzes and exams, which is how students will access this. I think the first big one that I often run into and have discussions with people about is if you would like to use question pools or not in your quiz. If you would like to use question pools, we highly recommend developing them first over in this tab here, the question library, and then import them back into your quiz. That seems to be a cleaner process than making them in the quiz itself. If you don't want to use question pools, then directly into the quiz is fine, but same kind of thing. It's really nice to have that question pool, that question library to keep a list of what you've got and an easy space to update. And you can also add some hidden information in there that students won't see that you can then use to help keep track of where things are at. And what I mean by that is I'll jump over into the question library and we'll talk about organizing the question library. So we can simply put questions straight into the question library. Like you can see here, there's a whole bunch of questions that are kind of straight in. Or we can create these folders. And unfortunately, Brightspace has some weird terminology. The folders that are referred to as sections here. Now, I know we typically refer to sections as like cohorts at Charles State University, but sections being a very similar, being a folder structure when it comes to the question library. And sections is used a little bit interchangeably depending where you are in Brightspace. So just try not to overthink it. When you see this top level option with the separating bar, it's usually a folder style option. And what I quickly want to jump into is first thing I've done is I've made a decision. I'm going to arrange my question library by topics. But then thinking about how you want to structure it underneath that. So I've actually got 2 levels of folders, in some case 3 levels of folders. I generally don't recommend going too many levels. It can start to get complicated. But I think what's really important is picking a system that works for you and then being consistent in that. So I think my first example for topic one is split into parts A and B. And then I think, yeah, that's right. I have easy, medium, and hard style questions. So for example, I might want students to get 5 easy questions from that pool, 4 medium questions, and 1 hard question for my 10-question quiz. And then you've got the ability to add more and more questions into those folders and increase the size of those pools. For topic 2, we went with a different style. So I've split out the style of questions. So how many multiple choice questions that would be therefore self-marking versus how many written response questions that would require manual marking. So that was a clear distinction in a different subject. And this one I actually stole from another subject where they actually decided what they really wanted to do was make sure that each of the different outcomes was addressed. So students were getting a question from each of the different outcomes. So rather than pooling by difficulty, they pooled by the outcome. So they wrote out the outcomes in full, just in case there were ever changes in the future to those outcomes, so they could make sure that they noted that that was different. The other thing I liked is that they actually added to the end of their folder structure when they were last updated. So you can see here, for example, that this was last updated in 2025-60, and really easy just to edit that and to be able to change when this folder was last updated. So if I was to add something for this session, we could go and update this. And then someone coming onto this who's maybe not familiar with this subject or topic can see when changes were last made to that folder. Big advantage when we're talking about, material that's being used over multiple years, of course. Any questions so far? I'm sure I'm going through some really, I think, things that people have gotten fairly comfortable with at this stage. Stuart. Oh, sorry, Stuart, are you able to unmute yourself or not? Oh, good. I've just turned on allow mic.
Good.
And allow camera. Sorry, Tom, do you want to go through the list?
There's no conspiracy in having it turned off.
Yeah, no, good. Sorry, Stuart. Yeah.
Now, excellent idea, that topic 3. So can you swap? Is there a way of going from one subject to another, or master site to another site, where they may have similar things and you can use that library?
So you would have to do an export and an import to do that. Right. Okay. If you need support with that, we do recommend logging a DLC ticket to do that, because it can cause some complications if things have the same name. So you can just log yourself a show or ticket and get that process completed. So
not simple then?
Not straightforward, no. It's generally designed for everything to be done in the master side of subjects. We've talked about that quite a lot in the new design. Once we move to Brightspace, as much as possible done in the master site and specific for that subject.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Murray. That's helpful.
Oh, no worries. Great question. I think, yeah, it's one of those that's a general statement for most things within Brightspace. If you want to transfer it between subjects, try and log a DLT ticket. And if it's something small, just make the change manually. So I would often say, for example, if I wanted just one question from somewhere else, just do a split screen and remake the question from scratch in the new subject. All right, I'm going to jump back over to the quizzes and exams, then back to the main page and look at designing a quiz from scratch. So we're going to click a new quiz here. A lot of standard stuff that we've all seen before. So I think here becomes a really important one. Are we in the master site or are we in the session site? Now, ideally, as much as possible is being done in the master site. So we're naming our quiz. This might be, let's say it's a topic 1 quiz. I can type this morning. And whether or not we want to link it to the gradebook, which we usually do if it's an assessment task that's worth marks. Otherwise, we might not want to, and we might want this just to be a formative one. We can now leave quizzes as 0 points, which we previously unable to do, which is awesome. And of course, dates, or all of the ones under the dates and availabilities and conditions, all of these need to be done in the session or subject sites, not in the master site, because that would be specific to each session that runs. One of the things that we often see happen here in the description is large amounts of information being copied out from the subject outline. Now, this can be advantageous, but can also cause some problems. So the first problem it can cause is as the subject outline gets updated in future years, you've got to remember to come into the master site, update the quiz, and that has to be done before the rollout of those session sites, which is 4 weeks before each session. So that can be a little bit fiddly. One of the big advantages we've seen here and I've been able to use is to use some of the features that Brightspace has inbuilt. So in particular, the quick link one, which unfortunately you can't see straight away until you go and make it full screen, and then you get the full menu options up here. But what we can actually do is insert a quick link and say direct students to where they will find that information. So in this situation, we can direct them straight to the subject outline. So quite often I like to go, for all official information about this quiz, please refer to the, and then we're going to insert a quick link, which is this one here. And we're going to external learning tool because we're external to Brightspace. This one still throws me occasionally, but I have to constantly remind myself. The second I'm leaving anything that's outside of Brightspace, we're looking for an external learning tool. And then we should be able to find a long list of things, but down under S is the subject outline. So now this is a link that will take students directly to the subject outline for this subject. So now I don't need to worry about constantly updating the list of things. So if it's 10 multiple choice questions, for example, and next year I'm going to change it so it's 8 multiple choice and 2 multi-select and stuff like that, you just don't have to come in here repeatedly. You just make those changes in the subject outline, and the description, which we can now minimize, is going to direct students to click on this link, take them straight to the subject outline so that there's no double handling of that information, which obviously reduces our chances of error. So I highly recommend using the quick link, and unfortunately it's just not here in this pop-up. So you've got to click that full screen expand first to get that option. Then down here is where we can create the questions or question pools. Now, the other one that I find a little bit confusing is even though if we've gone and created those question pools in the question library, it's still a create a new pool. So a lot of people going to add existing. I still find myself doing it occasionally and then browsing the question library. It's not what we want to do. We want to go over here and we want to create the new question pool first. And then we're going to import that information from the question library here. So this might be, I think we called it topic 1, part A easy was one of the things I designed in the question library, and now I'm going to import it from the question library. So drop down menu here. I want not all of topic 1, not all of topic part A. I want just topic 1, part A, and then I want just the easy folder. And I can see here there are 6 questions for me to import, and now they're here. And I might want to give students, let's say they're going to get 3 of those 6 questions. Now, what's really good here is that now it won't let you save it. If you click save and the number is outside the range, it's going to tell me there's an error. And you can actually still look at the individual questions here as well. But what it will do is actually override the points per question. It needs to do that to make sure it's equitable. So you can't have, for example, because students are getting 3 of these questions at random, you couldn't have one of these worth more marks than another. Otherwise, it wouldn't really make sense in terms of adding up. So it's going to override that setting here. And you can change that to these are 2 points, etc. But the default is 1. And when we save that, it's going to import, and then we're going to have that question pool. And we would just rinse and repeat. So I would probably do a topic 1, part A, medium, part A, hard, etc. And that would enable us then to have multiple pools of questions that were all created previously in the question library beforehand. I'm not going to go through all the settings then over here on the right-hand side, but just going to jump to some of the new ones. So we've seen all of these settings here, which enables you to do different things. But the new settings are a little bit hidden away, actually. It's in under attempts. So when you go to manage the attempts, a lot of the settings don't appear until you change from the default of 1 attempt. So let's say that this was a less official quiz, and we want to make students have unlimited attempts. We're just trying to check the little check-in skill for themselves, and we want them to be able to practice as much as possible. So now we get this option, which is on new attempts, only allow answers from previously incorrect questions. So this has been quite a popular one where students don't have to continually answer, I'd say, especially if you've got a larger, say, practice quiz, say, let's say it's 40 multiple choice questions. You know, if students have gone through and they've gotten 26 correct, well, now they can go and focus on the 14 that they got wrong, rather than having to spend time re-going through the 26 that they already knew and the 14 they got wrong, if that kind of makes sense. So it can be really good to promote learning by turning this setting on. And that's as simple as just the tick box. It was also raised during the last presentation that this is the only place that you can actually ask Brightspace to do an automatic calculation with just a click of a button in terms of calculating averages. So rather than giving them the mark of just their highest attempt, you can ask it to calculate the average of all their attempts here, or their first or last attempt, things like that. So you could still say you might want to give students a couple of attempts at doing something, but their mark is going to be the first attempt they got, and then they can do it more for practice for themselves, but that's not going to affect their actual grade that's been awarded to them. Yes, Stuart, no worries. Yeah, so the step-by-step guide, sorry, so back here on the quiz setup, these are the guides here. So we've got the question pools in particular, and then we've got a step-by-step guide, all in the Brightspace help. So I'll chuck these over in the chat as well, but you can find them straight through the Padlet. But these have step-by-step how to find your way through all the different settings, some recommended settings. It can just be it's quite extensive. It's really tried to make sure it's covered all the different options and what they mean. So here we're on the configuration attempts right now and what that enables. So there's quite a lot of information there. I guess I'm just walking through a quick version of a live demonstration.
Yeah, that I understand that, Murray, but no, the idea is to have a one-pager flow chart. And because you're only revisiting it, you know basically the guts of stuff, but hey, what's the reminder? So you need an overall picture where you'd say, okay, that's right, this is what I do first, second, third, that kind of a thing.
Yeah, I'm with you. Sure, that sounds good. We could have a look at doing something like that. I think at this stage, it's just that there's such an extensive document already there. What do you cut? And I guess it's really hard to pick what people do and don't need. It's based, I guess, very much on the individual.
True. But
so
you
that's why
you don't want to reread a lot of stuff when you know the basics things, but you just need to know the steps through. A visual
certainly why it's broken down into sections to try and think about what section is the section that you're looking at, and those sections are designed to line up with the settings over here. So the headings over here, for example, will line up with those sections. So attempts and completion, you will see attempts and completion settings, etc. So whichever section you're in, you should have like a quick guide on that section, assuming that's where you're having trouble.
Thanks, Murray.
No worries. So the other new setting that's also come in is when you have multiple attempts. If you pick a specific number, we can actually add this one now, which is called attempt conditions. So what we can do here is we can release multiple attempts, but based on the condition setting of the mark that students receive. So, for example, for attempt 1, students must achieve between these scores to unlock attempt 2 and achieve between these scores to unlock attempt 3. So quite often what's happened, I've seen this used now, is for those, those tech fails. So a lot of people saying, if students scored between 45 and 50, so they've just failed, we're going to give them another attempt. And what we can also see here is that this is where that really important setting comes in, where you could say, for example, you might decide that it's best to give them an average of the 2 marks that they achieve across the 2 attempts, or they're going to get their first attempt mark regardless, or they're going to get their last attempt mark regardless, or whichever one they got highest. So you've got a lot of control here with what that will actually do. And I see a lot of people saying, for example, that they might give them an average, because what we don't want is, say, for a student to get, say, a 47 on the first one. The second time, they're obviously heaps more confident, have a lot more understanding of what they're going to be asked, and then go and score themselves a 90, and then they guess a 90 versus someone who, say, scored a 60 in the first place, who on a second attempt may have scored a 90. So setting those averages, or the fact that they're still going to get the mark from their first attempt regardless, is a really good opportunity. But then you could say, for example, justify, making sure that they pass the subject. So now they've met that minimum 50% requirement, but they're still actually going to get the mark that was associated with their first attempt for their overall grade. So lots of settings here. And again, this can kind of go onward. So if I add more attempts, for example, it will simply add more options down here. So if I add even more again, it'll add more and more and more to the requirements to release. It is just really important that you set all of those requirements all the way through. So for example, I don't want to leave these like I have right now. But like I said, most popular kind of options we're seeing is maybe 1 extra attempt for those who maybe just got a tech fail, to try and ensure that they're meeting those minimum requirements without having to manually go in and have them go through an application process. So that's quite handy to be able to do that. And then it's as simple as clicking OK, and that setting is applied. The other one that was a little bit new that a lot of people were interested in was the ability of what happens when published, what's displays to learners. So let's say I've got a quiz and it's open for a week. So I want my students to have a really good opportunity. Let's say it's open all of this week. And I want my students to automatically get their results when they complete. So I want them to get their grade. But what I don't want, for example, let's say I do actually want my students to get the correct answers. I want them to know what they are. If I click this option, my problem is a student that did it today would potentially be able to share that information that a student who still wants to sit this quiz tomorrow. So what we can actually do is turn that to no questions and customize the quiz results display. And we can add an additional view. And when we add an additional view, the awesome feature we get is the ability to lock a display date. So for example, rather than having those answers visible straight away, they can get their grade straight away. But I could say, I can set it to Friday, but maybe there'll be some students with a 7-day auto extension. So let's set it to next Friday. From that date onwards, we can now get all questions, and I can set here to show the correct answers. So now I can set a certain date and time, that I can display this information to students. So obviously, because it's got a date and a time, this needs to be done every session. But the advantage is you can do this in advance. You don't have to go back in and release this at a later date. If for those people that like to get organized and get ahead. So we can set this now, and this is not going to come into effect until that date, where they'll then be able to see all their answers displayed with the correct options. So just quite a handy thing that you can set up if you would like to do that in advance. All right, I'm going to take a pause there. So that's our quiz setup and our new settings kind of covered. And like I said, these new settings are in these instruction here in the Brightspace help. They're included now, which wasn't done at the time because it was a very new update. Any questions before I move on to amending questions that have errors once submissions have kind of started? And sorry, you might have to pop your hand up if you're unable to unmute yourself, but I think Tom's gone through the list and given you mic access, hopefully.
So
awesome.
Murray, if you're going to attach an award to a quiz, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the grade book then.
Not sure what you mean there, Stuart. So an award and a grade book are a separate process. So it definitely doesn't have to be. You can attach an award to any quiz.
Okay, that's what the question was. Yep. So
yeah, cool.
Yep, they're separate from the award is separate from the flow through to the grade book.
Yes, you can definitely attach an award to a quiz and then just not attach that quiz to the grade book. Yeah, they're separate settings. Yeah.
Thanks for confirming that.
No worries. Great question. All right, well, we're going to jump back into my sandbox. I'm just going to cancel that random creation and go and have a look at a quiz that already exists. So this is the example quiz that I have prepared from earlier. And what we're going to talk about here is let's say that there's a question that a student has gone and completed, and students have let me know that there's a problem with one of those questions. Like I said, there's two very distinct situations. The quiz that's open for the week, or the quiz and is still live, so students are still completing it, versus the quiz that is completed, finalized. Students aren't going to do it anymore, but I still need to fix the faulty question. The only real difference comes down to is making decisions around equity. So for example, if it's the middle of the week, let's say it's a quiz, like I said, that's live this week, it's only Thursday, and I've had a student report to me there's a problem with a question, and I went and updated that question and then gave everyone who got that faulty question full marks. Is that equitable to a student who did that question tomorrow, the new version, who then struggled because maybe it was a really difficult question? So just thinking about those kind of things can be a little bit of a challenge. There's not a right or wrong answer. We do recommend taking that back to your school for discussion if you need to, or to some colleagues. But just being conscious of things like that. I think it's particularly when those questions are quite challenging. There are a few different ways to address that. But what we generally want to do when we're going in here, we're going to look at the grade setting. So we're going to click on the drop-down arrow and go over to grade the quiz. And this will take us to a different view that we should all be hopefully fairly familiar with. And a lot of people going in here, now this one actually has multiple attempts on this quiz. So it may not be your case, may be a single attempt only. But what people often do is go in here and click on each individual student and go to their attempt and go and grade their attempt, especially if there's manual marking involved. So I believe this one had some automatic questions, and then these are manually marked. So you can see I've gone in and it's flagged this has been graded by myself. So these two questions manually marked. What we can actually do is there are other tabs up here at the top which give us some advantages. So I can actually go into this one called attempts, and then I can use some filtering options and actually apply by, so you can apply by sections and stuff if you've got multiple cohorts, which I don't have in this case. But here you're going to see them sorted by attempts rather than by students. Don't particularly find this one hugely valuable, in my personal opinion. The one that I find particularly useful is the questions. So what we can do here is we can, instead of displaying the individual student's response and there's several questions, we can actually go in and view each question at a time and then click through each student response. So this one is a little bit fiddly. So the first setting is really important, is up here at the top. So we can do one of two things. I can either grade an individual response, or I can update all attempts. So that one's really handy, like I said, when you've identified a faulty question, gone and fixed that question, and then we want to update all the people that got that faulty question. So in this situation, unfortunately, and it's really hard when I've got examples, the faulty question was already detected. And what happened is we went into the quiz, we found the faulty question, I think it was the first one, and I made a change and called it version 2. Now, I wouldn't recommend writing version 2 specifically on there. I just did that for this example, so it was easily identifiable as the one that I'd made changes to. But we simply go in, fix the question, and click the save button. You will get a warning that this will only impact future attempts. And some of those settings that we talked about previously are going to be locked. So they're not going to let you change certain things simply because it would cause really big problems for equity amongst our students. And we need to make sure we save, of course, and save and close that. So that faulty question has now been fixed. But where did it go? So it's gone now from the quiz tool. But if we go back to the grade setting and go across to the question tabs like we talked about, it now has this section. It will have added this section, questions that are not in the quiz anymore. So you might have to scroll. So this one's got a small quiz. If you've got a long quiz, you've got to scroll all the way to the bottom. And this is now the old version, or the historic version, of that faulty question. So what I would probably want to do in this situation is update all attempts instead of the individual. And unfortunately, again, this setting is at the top. So you've got to scroll all the way to the top, pick these, and then scroll all the way to the bottom, and then click on the question that was faulty. And what we're going to do, this is going to bulk update all 8 attempts on this question. Now, please note that's attempts, not number of students. So if there's multiple attempts, that number is can be obviously multiples of the number of students. That's caused a little bit of confusion in the past. But what we can do is give all attempts full marks. So the question was worth 3 points. It was faulty. All the students that got the faulty question are going to get 3 marks. And then I'm going to click save. So that solves that key problem. And then we're going to click go back to questions. But what's happened now as well is the students that are yet to complete this question, if that's the case, so if that's a final exam, students are all done and dusted, that's really easy. We've fixed the question up. That puts it at the bottom, which makes it really easy to identify the faulty question. And we've gone and given students full marks for that question. Done and dusted. If this is a quiz, like I said, that's a week long and it's still open right now, I need to consider some equity for students that now have to do this question, the updated question, and whether or not that's equitable for them to be given that opportunity. So what would I need to do is wait until the end of the quiz and then go back in, find that question, which you can see is actually a little bit hard to tell. So you can't actually tell from here that this question is the updated one of this version, if that makes sense, other than finding the name or knowing which question it was in order. So sometimes it is handy to write updated at the start of them in the names so that you can identify them quickly and easily. And students are aware that they got an updated version of a question. The other thing, so then you would just do the same process where we might update all attempts. And let's just say we're going to give all attempts full marks for this question, regardless of whether they got the new version or the old version. The students that just didn't get the faulty version got the extra practice. The other thing we can do is grade individual responses from here. So this is really handy when what we've found in the past, a lot of people going to the quizzes, going grade, and then going into each student. Let's say let's say, for example, I've been allocated to mark question, let's say it's question 2 in this case, and Tom's been allocated to mark question 3, and Kelly, I'm going to borrow you. You've been asked to mark question 1. So what people would do is I'm going to mark question 2. I'd go into attempt 4. I'd have to scroll down, find a question 2, grade it, and then click save draft, and then move to the next student. Same thing. Now, not a big deal if you've only got a couple of questions, but if you've got like 40 multiple choice questions and 2 written responses at the end, and you've only got to grade those 2 written responses, big scrolling and bigger load times while this happens. So no worries, Kelly. So that can be really, really time consuming. That's probably the biggest one, and easy to miss a student. Like if you're scrolling down all the time and easy to go that click through by accident. What you can actually do is go over to the questions, and we want to grade the individual responses. And this one's a little bit confusing because this ticked box says view the evaluated responses. So right now, if I was to click on question 2, which is the question I need to mark, it's going to show me the ones that have already been evaluated, right? So if I do that right now, which is not necessarily what I want to do. So these ones have already been marked. So I don't want to do that. These have been marked, they're sorted, unless I wanted to say maybe do a review of the questions that have been marked. But if I turn this off, it's now going to show me all of the question 2s from all of the attempts that have not been marked. So the advantage here is I can click on this and I'm hoping, oh, see, there you go, there's an attempt that hasn't been marked. So I was hoping to potentially see no attempts here that weren't marked because I've done my marking. So it's a really great way, if you have that unticked, just to go through, hopefully only a couple of written response questions, and check that they've all been graded. That way you can't miss any. So if I click on, say, this one, it's blank. Unfortunately, it doesn't say this, but that means that all of those questions have been given a grade because it's blank. So that's the kind of viewput you do want to see, a blank input, because otherwise it means it's been ungraded. So if I go to this one, and you can see it's really simple just to click through the students here. I can see the question, I can see the response, I can provide the grade, I can provide feedback, all right here. Let's give Tom 3 out of 3, click save, and I've completed them all, so it takes me back here. But if I go back in again, it'll be blank. So now all of those responses have been graded. So a really great fail-safe way as well to check. And instead of marking, say, by different cohorts, particularly large subjects, this is really important. So instead of, say, me marking all of the Wagga distance students and Tom marking all of the Bathurst distance students, we could mark by individual questions for better consistency in our marking. So like I said, we can divide up the written response questions. Now, a rule of thumb, they should be the kind of the main ones that we're targeting for manual marking. The rest should all be auto marking. And like I said, it enables you not to have to worry about scrolling through each student response, and saves that load time, which can be a little bit laggy at times, but making sure that we click the correct settings up here before we click on the questions. So a little bit of information in that one, but the key here being, if there's a faulty question, you edit the faulty question, it goes to the bottom. We can update all attempts at once and give those students an appropriate mark for that faulty question. And the other thing we can do is grade the individual responses. Usually we want to untick the view evaluator responses, and then you can check that each one of the written response questions, which we can see the type over here, written response, have been marked by a marker. So a really great way to fail safe, particularly on final exams. So that is amending questions after submissions, and a little bit, we're trying to jump straight into the reviewing before publishing and those manually marked questions. Any questions at this stage? So I've done lots of talking, which I'm good at sometimes. Well, no worries. What I might do then is I might jump over to the previous session and go through some of the key things that came up in that and just make sure that I did address them in this one. So the recording is here, which is found on YouTube as well. And this recording will also go up. So it's 6 minutes and 10 seconds into the video. Oh, that's right. Lachlan reminded me that to remind everyone that the sections in the quiz tool, in the question library are for what we call folders often. So that was just a reminder here that we have this section, which we would refer to as like a folder. So that was an important reminder there. So it's a little bit, apparently, I have less experience in Interact 2, but the way question pools were designed, a question raised here at 11 minutes and 15 seconds, apparently in Interact 2, you created the question pools in the library and then imported them into quizzes. In this one, you create the question pool itself in the quiz, and then you draw from the library the questions that you've designed. So hence, I like to put them in a really nice folder or section structure, and then you can just import them nice and easily into each of the individual quizzes. And you can use the same questions that you've designed in the question library in multiple quizzes. So that's definitely possible. We talked about that's right, the average calculation. So it's really the only place that can be done. So that was when we were in the quiz and we were designing a new quiz. The fact that there is now the ability to change here and do an average of all attempts. And just thinking about these settings, particularly once you get to more attempts. All right, Jennifer, that's good to hear. I'm hoping that means I covered everything that you were hoping to get out of today's session. Problem questions. So yeah, that really important distinction between if this quiz is still running and it's a live quiz and we've identified a problem. So really just trying to make sure that it's equitable for students still making attempts. I think that's been one thing that's caused a lot of, had a lot of questions in the past. So like I said, if it's worth 3 marks, like the example one I provided, is giving 50% of my students who got this faulty question the full 3 marks equitable to then the 50% of students who are still doing the quiz and now got this really hard question and they're scoring, let's say they score an average of 1.7, you know, or should I be giving, say, for example, the students who got the faulty question a 1.7 average or maybe a rounded up 2, discussions to have at the school level, but I think really important. No worries, Jennifer. Thanks for coming along. Spotting the questions that haven't been marked manually. Yeah, so also same kind of thing when we talked about, so going over to the grade, the ability, one of the things we've found in those, particularly like I said, large subjects is where this really starts to have an impact, is if I go to here, how do I tell that Adam, you know, one question got missed being marked, you know, by accident, or the internet lagged, or the marker just missed it by chance. So it really can be a little bit frustrating, but that's where the check by question. So really important here, if you have a really large subject that is the subject convener, you're going through, and like I said, you can grade the individual responses, turn off the view evaluated ones. So then you're going to see the non-evaluated ones and click through these questions. So like I said, I'm hoping it loads up blank like that. It's perfect. That's exactly what I want to see. So now I can just quickly click through question 1, question 2, and question 3. And I can see that every single one of those attempts has been completely graded. So we are sorted. There are no ungraded questions. Unfortunately, it's not going to identify any other problems, but at least it will stop students having ungraded responses, which is obviously one of our big concerns when giving that results back to students. So now I could go and publish those attempts just like we always would. So click here and then our publish button once I've done that kind of final check. So just an extra step that you can do in that final check. Multiple attempt and manual marking. So someone did ask a question about the fact that what they wanted to potentially do was mark the written response questions, but only on the final attempt. Because students had multiple attempts, the final one is the one that counted. So back in the settings, they set the final grade as the one. The problem is the system can't do both at the same time. It's not it's not specifically designed for that. So if I do click into, say, question 1, it's going to show me all the attempts like we saw before. So for example, if I click on this one, when I go to the all setting, update all, and click on this question, it talks about the attempts. So there are 8 attempts here, but there are actually only 2 students in this situation. So if I go back and look at the users, I can see that those 8 attempts come from just 2 students. So it can't differentiate that. We can go and click on attempts and then search, look in here for like the final attempt, but I find it a little bit tedious, the process, and not particularly worth doing. So it's definitely designed for more like a final exam, 1 attempt, written response questions that need marking. Generally, that's why we advise against too much manual marking in other situations, because it can have these kind of little challenges. This was a great point. There was a question raised about the difficulty settings over in the question library. So in the question library, when we're designing a question, we can see this kind of information over here. So obviously these are folders, we don't see it, but these are questions here. We can see the type of question, multiple choice, true, false, multi-select, and we can see how many points I've allocated to those questions. So I can see here the multi-select is actually worth 2 marks. And there's a difficulty setting. So you can actually set the difficulty, but there didn't seem to be any kind of filter options or anything like that. So we actually found that this is a fairly redundant kind of other than just a piece of information that you can see here, hence the design of the sections or folders with the easy, medium, hard to separate that out. Didn't find this particularly useful, unfortunately. And then we probably talked about one of the other most important things that has caused some issues. So people reporting to DLT that there's a problem with their questions, they're not marking correctly. And what we've usually found is the system is marking correctly. It's just not what people wanted it to do. So one of the things that can easily happen, particularly with, say, multi-select questions seem to be our biggest one that causes this problem, is when I'm in the question library, let's say I'm in part A, easy, and I've designed some multi-select questions. So I've got example 1 and example 2. So I'm just going to edit this. But let's just say I'm going to create 10 questions for this pool, and Tom is going to go and create 10 questions for this pool. So large subjects, again, cause our problems, lots of academics working in there. So I've gone in and I've created this question. And what I've done is I have chosen the setting that the students, so instead of getting, say, all or nothing, I'm going to give them correct selection. So that means each individual one of these is going to be marked separately at a value of 0.25 each. And as I add more options, you can see here that drops. So now it's marking each one of those at 0.2 each, whether the student selected the correct option or the incorrect option. So for example, if a student was to click A, B, C, it would mark this one wrong and then these 4 as correct. So they would get 0.8 marks. What we often find is that one academic potentially has gone and done that, and say somebody else is making questions. So now Tom's going to make questions, but he has left the setting on, say, something like all or nothing. So now the student that clicked A, B, C, D, let's say it's exactly the same question as before. So if I design it exactly the same as the other one, and now a student that accidentally or clicked A incorrectly and clicked B and C correctly, they're going to get 0 for this question, while another student's going to get 0.8 for an equivalent kind of question. Does that kind of make sense? And particularly when we're working with question pools, one student could get the 0 or nothing question, sorry, the 1 or nothing question, and the other student could get the partial marking question. So then we get equity issues. So just really important that whatever the standard is that's picked here has been applied consistently in the question library, and that you can go in there and check that. So definitely need a lot of final checking when we've got multiple academics and really large subjects. The other one that's been my little pet peeve, and it's not particularly a big deal, but students have reported they really struggle with it, is, for example, see how I've got A, B, C, D, E as my answers? Students really hate when the randomized answer order has been selected, because now, for example, these will just be shuffled. So students really hate that when there is a logical order to the answers. And it's also really important when, for example, you have an all of the above option, that we don't want to put that randomize on, because that could be at the top or in the middle. So that's caused some issues in the past, with the default being that people want the randomize on, but that would be the exception. The other thing we can do is we can actually go up here, and there are more options. So we can add more things. And one of the ones we can add is enumeration. So we can add A, B, C, D, E in front of them without having to manually type that out. Again, becomes really important not to randomize when you don't want A to be C and B to be D and C to be E. That students report, again, that's really, really frustrating. So just being conscious of whether or not you've turned enumeration on or off. And whether or not randomized order applies best for your question. So just being conscious of those settings here. But this is the one that's caused some confusion, where people have selected different ones. Like I said, they've saved them and they're all in the same pool. And there's no quick and easy way to check that. You need to go through each question and check that. So when you've got multiple people designing into a question pool, having that initial discussion with those academics, make sure everyone's on the same page about the settings that are going to be applied to the questions they're designing. So that's caused, like I said, some confusion and issues in the past. And that was the last thing that we talked about. And also, like I said, also avoid the randomization of A, B, C, D style questions, or ones with all of the above at the bottom. Also very important to avoid that. Well, no worries, lots of talking from me. We've got about 10 minutes left in the session. More than happy to stick around and answer any questions anyone might have. Otherwise, we might wrap up a little bit early. Let's get on. I really appreciate everyone coming along. It's always good to get a refresher and see what's new and what's happening. Like I said, this recording will also go up, and I'll add it to the Padlet. No worries. All right, well, we might rock and roll then. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.